Eleanor Whitman's arthritic fingers fumbled with her car keys in the Walmart parking lot, groceries scattered at her feet as October wind whipped through her silver hair. The massive German Shepherd materialized from nowhere, sitting at perfect military attention 3 feet away, amber eyes locked on hers with an intensity that made her heart skip. It wasn't possible. Rex had been dead for 2 years. The shopping cart crashed into a nearby car as Eleanor stumbled backward, her trembling hand clutching the purple heart pin on her late son's army jacket. Other shoppers turned to stare, concerned murmurs rippling through the parking lot as the old woman stood frozen, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. She remembered Michael's last letter, the one that arrived with Rex's collar. "Take care of each other, Ma." But she'd failed, lost the dog just like she'd lost everything else that mattered. "Rex?" she whispered, her voice breaking. Who had been caring for him all this time? And why did he look like he'd been waiting for her? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Eleanor Nana Whitman had weathered 78 years on this earth, but the last 5 had nearly broken her spirit completely. Standing barely 5'2" in her late husband's oversized army jacket, she carried herself with the practiced dignity of a woman who'd learned to hide her pain behind steel gray eyes and a stubborn chin. The purple heart pinned to her collar wasn't Walter's. It belonged to their son, Michael, presented to her by a stone-faced colonel who'd spoken in careful, rehearsed phrases about heroism and sacrifice. 47 years I've been shopping for a family, she'd whispered to herself that morning, staring at the single-serve frozen dinners in her cart. Now I'm buying food for one. The foreclosure notice crumpled in her jacket pocket served as a constant reminder that even her modest ranch home, the one Walter had bought with his GI Bill benefits, would soon belong to someone else. $67,000 in medical bills had a way of consuming everything, even a lifetime of careful saving. Her daily routine had become a monument to loss. 5 a.m. brought 12 different medications sorted into weekly pill containers, each one a small defeat against the arthritis that made opening jars impossible and the heart condition that made climbing stairs dangerous. By 5:30 she'd brew coffee for one, though muscle memory always reached for 3 cups before reality crashed back. The kitchen table, once alive with Walter's morning crossword puzzles and Michael's military deployment stories, now hosted only silence and the growing stack of bills she couldn't pay. "Another day, boys," she'd tell their photographs each morning, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Another day, you're not here." Walter's picture showed him in his dress blues from 1969, young and confident before Vietnam taught him about survivor's guilt. Michael's official portrait captured him at 26, the same age Walter had been when they'd met in that field hospital in Da Nang. Both men had inherited the Whitman tradition of service, and both had paid prices she was still calculating. Rex had been Michael's anchor through 3 tours in Afghanistan, a 100-pound German Shepherd trained not just for bomb detection, but for the kind of emotional support that kept soldiers sane in impossible places. When Michael's belongings arrived in carefully packed boxes, Rex had been the only thing that still felt alive, still carried Michael's scent, still looked at her with eyes that remembered her son's voice. For 2 years, that dog had been her lifeline to hope, the only creature on earth who understood the magnitude of what they'd both lost. Then came that terrible thunderstorm in April 2022 when lightning had spooked Rex from their backyard and he'd vanished into the Denver suburbs like smoke. She'd searched for months, posted flyers on every street corner, called every shelter within 100 miles. The police had been kind but realistic. "Ma'am, after 6 months, you have to consider that he might not be coming back." But Eleanor Whitman hadn't survived this long by accepting defeat easily. "Some things are worth fighting for," she'd tell anyone who'd listen, even when you're fighting ghosts. The October wind carried the scent of approaching winter as Eleanor struggled with her weekly grocery run, the same ritual she'd performed for 47 years of marriage and motherhood. Her arthritic fingers ached as she gripped the shopping cart handle, each step across the Walmart parking lot a small victory against the body that seemed determined to betray her. The cart was lighter these days. Single-serve frozen dinners, individual yogurt cups, the economy-size bottles of prescription medications that cost more than her monthly grocery budget used to be. "Lord willing and the creek don't rise," she muttered, using one of Walter's favorite expressions as she fumbled for her car keys. The purple heart pin on Michael's old army jacket caught the afternoon light, a daily reminder of the son who'd never make it home for Thanksgiving again. Her hands shook not just from the cold, but from the crushing weight of loneliness that had become her constant companion. That's when she saw him. Rex emerged from behind a row of parked cars like something from a dream she'd given up having. The massive German Shepherd moved with the same measured, purposeful gait she remembered, 90 pounds of muscle and intelligence wrapped in a coat that had once been lustrous black and tan, but now appeared dulled and scarred. He stopped exactly 3 feet away and sat at perfect military attention, those unmistakable amber eyes fixed on her face with an intensity that made her heart stutter in her chest. "No," Eleanor whispered, her voice barely audible above the wind. "You can't be real." But there was no mistaking that noble head tilt, the way his ears swiveled forward when he heard her voice, the precise angle of his sitting posture that Michael had drilled into him during months of training. Rex had always been more than a pet. He'd been a soldier's partner, trained to detect explosives, to comfort wounded men, to alert medical personnel when his handler was in distress. Looking at him now, Eleanor could see that military bearing remained intact despite whatever trials he'd endured. The shopping cart clattered away, forgotten, as Eleanor's groceries scattered across the asphalt. Other shoppers turned to stare at the elderly woman who stood frozen in place, one hand pressed to her heart, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. Rex didn't move, didn't break his disciplined posture, but his tail gave the slightest wag, the same controlled greeting he'd always given when uncertain about his reception. "Rex?" The name came out as a broken sob. "Is that really you, boy?" At the sound of his name, Rex's ears perked forward and he tilted his head in that characteristic way that had always made Michael laugh. But something was different. Where once those amber eyes had held nothing but trust and eager affection, now Eleanor saw a wariness that spoke of hard lessons learned. His coat, once thick and glossy, showed patches where fur had grown back over what looked like old injuries. There was a barely perceptible limp in his left rear leg, and a thin scar ran from his left ear down to his collar line. Eleanor sank to her knees on the cold pavement, extending one trembling hand. "Oh, sweetheart, what happened to you? Where have you been?" Rex studied her outstretched palm for a long moment, then slowly approached. When his wet nose touched her fingers, the familiar warmth sent a jolt of recognition through both of them. He sniffed carefully, processing scents and memories, then pressed his massive head against her chest in the same gentle way he used to greet her when Michael brought him home on leave. "I looked everywhere for you," Eleanor whispered into his fur, breathing in the scent that was both familiar and strange. "Every shelter, every pound, every rescue organization in 3 counties. The police said you were probably dead." As she held him, her fingers found something unexpected. A collar she didn't recognize, newer and heavier than the simple leather one he'd worn when he disappeared. Hidden beneath his thick neck fur was what felt like a small electronic device, smooth and purposeful. Eleanor's blood went cold as the implications hit her. Someone had been taking care of Rex. Someone had put this equipment on him. Someone had known exactly where he was while she'd spent 2 years grieving and searching. Rex suddenly tensed in her arms, his head swiveling toward the far end of the parking lot where a black van sat idling. Through the tinted windshield, Eleanor could just make out the silhouette of someone watching them. When she looked directly at the vehicle, the driver immediately started the engine and began moving toward the exit. "Who's watching us, boy?" Eleanor asked, her voice tight with a fear she didn't fully understand. "And why do I get the feeling that finding you was exactly what someone wanted to happen?" Rex whined softly, a sound she'd never heard from him before, not distress or excitement, but something that sounded almost like a warning. Eleanor's hands trembled as she guided her old Honda Civic through the familiar streets of suburban Denver, Rex sitting perfectly upright in the passenger seat like the disciplined soldier he'd been trained to be. Every few seconds she caught herself glancing in the rearview mirror, searching for any sign of the black van that had watched them in the parking lot. The electronic device hidden in Rex's collar felt like a weight against her chest, even though she wasn't the one wearing it. "We're going to see Dr. Martinez," she told Rex, her voice steadier than she felt. "She'll know what to make of all this." Sarah Martinez had been Michael's recommended veterinarian, a former Army vet herself who specialized in military working dogs transitioning to civilian life. If anyone could explain the mysterious equipment Rex was carrying, it would be her. The Paws and Claws Veterinary Clinic occupied a modest brick building on the edge of town, its parking lot dotted with pickup trucks and family sedans. Eleanor had brought Rex here dozens of times during his first months home from Afghanistan, when nightmares and sudden noises would send him into defensive postures that worried the neighbors. Dr. Martinez had been patient and understanding, never judging either the dog's trauma or Eleanor's desperate need to keep some piece of her son alive. "Mrs. Whitman?" Dr. Martinez looked up from her computer screen as Eleanor led Rex through the waiting room. At 45, Sarah Martinez carried herself with the same quiet competence that Eleanor remembered from her nursing days, someone accustomed to making life and death decisions under pressure. Her dark eyes widened as she took in Rex's appearance. "My God, is that really Rex? We all thought that he was dead." "I know." Eleanor's voice was tight with emotions she couldn't quite name. "But someone's been taking care of him, Doctor. Someone who put things on him that I don't understand." In the examination room, Dr. Martinez's professional demeanor shifted as she began her assessment. Her hands moved over Rex's body with practiced efficiency, noting the healed injuries and the evidence of regular veterinary care. When her fingers found the collar device, her expression darkened considerably. "Mrs. Whitman, I need to ask you to sit down." Dr. Martinez's voice carried a gravity that made Eleanor's chest tighten. "Rex has been receiving regular medical care, professional care. His vaccination records show treatments at a facility I've never heard of, something called Mountain View Recovery Services." "Recovery services?" Eleanor felt the world tilting slightly off its axis. "What kind of recovery?" Dr. Martinez hesitated, then pulled up something on her computer screen. "His microchip is still active, but it's registered to a classified military database. When I try to access his records, I get redirected to a government server that requires security clearance I don't have." She turned the screen toward Eleanor, showing a page filled with redacted text and official seals. "Mrs. Whitman, according to this system, Rex is listed as part of something called KIA Handler Recovery Unit 47B. The words hit Eleanor like a physical blow. KIA Handler Recovery. What does that mean? "It means—" Dr. Martinez's voice trailed off as she read further down the screen. Her face went pale. "Oh, dear God. Mrs. Whitman, this database shows Michael's status as witness protection active." Eleanor's world stopped. The examination room seemed to spin around her as the implications of those words crashed through her consciousness like a freight train. That's impossible. They told me he was killed in action. I have the death certificate. I have the flag they gave me at his funeral. According to this, that was a cover story. Dr. Martinez's hands shook as she scrolled through more classified information. There's a note here about testimony in a military tribunal, something about war crimes and contractor violations. Mrs. Whitman, if this is accurate, your son isn't dead. He's been in hiding. Eleanor couldn't breathe. 2 years of grief. 2 years of visiting an empty grave. 2 years of believing she'd buried her only child. All of it based on a lie. They let me think my son was dead? They let me plan his funeral, let me cry over an empty coffin? There's more. Dr. Martinez's voice was barely a whisper. Rex's assignment was listed as Family Protection and Communication Protocol. Mrs. Whitman, I think Rex was supposed to find you. I think someone's been using him to keep track of you. Before Eleanor could respond, Dr. Martinez's phone rang. She glanced at the caller ID and frowned. I don't recognize this number. She answered cautiously. Paws and Claws Veterinary Clinic. Eleanor watched as Dr. Martinez's expression changed from confusion to fear. No, I haven't accessed any classified files. I'm just treating a patient. A pause. Yes, I understand the implications. Another pause. Longer this time. I see. Yes. I'll keep this confidential. When she hung up, Dr. Martinez's hands were visibly shaking. Mrs. Whitman, that was someone from the Department of Defense. They know you're here. They know what we've been looking at. She quickly began closing windows on her computer screen. They want to meet with you. Rex, who had been unusually calm during the examination, suddenly became alert. His ears pricked forward, and he moved to position himself between Eleanor and the examination room door. A low growl rumbled in his chest, not aggressive, but warning. What's he doing? Eleanor asked. He's protecting you. Just like he was trained to do. Dr. Martinez grabbed Eleanor's arm. Mrs. Whitman, I think you're both in serious danger. If your son really is alive, if he really is in witness protection, then there are people who have very good reasons for wanting to keep him hidden. And if Rex was meant to lead you to him... The sound of car doors slamming in the parking lot made them both freeze. Rex's growl intensified, and he moved closer to Eleanor's side. The back exit, Dr. Martinez whispered urgently. Go now. Take Rex and run. Whatever your son was hiding from, I think it just found you. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs as she and Rex slipped through the veterinary clinic's back exit into the alley behind the building. The October air felt sharp against her face, carrying the scent of dying leaves and the promise of winter. Rex moved with purpose beside her, his military training evident in every controlled step as he guided her away from the clinic toward a maze of residential streets she'd never navigated before. Where are we going, boy? She whispered, her arthritic knees protesting with each hurried step. Rex seemed to know exactly where he was leading her, turning left at a corner, then right down a tree-lined street where modest ranch homes sat behind chain-link fences. It was as if he'd memorized a route, planned for exactly this moment. They'd been walking for 10 minutes when a black sedan pulled alongside them. Eleanor's blood turned to ice, but Rex remained calm, even wagging his tail slightly. The passenger window rolled down, revealing a weathered face she didn't recognize, a man in his 50s with graying temples and intelligent blue eyes that reminded her somehow of Michael. Mrs. Whitman? The man's voice was gentle but urgent. My name is Marcus Sullivan. I've been watching over Rex for the past 2 years. We need to talk. Eleanor backed away instinctively. I don't know who you are or what you want, but your son is alive. The words cut through her protest like a blade. "Michael is alive, and he sent me to protect you both. But right now, we're all in serious danger." Rex moved between Eleanor and the car, but his posture wasn't defensive. Instead, he sat and looked expectantly at Marcus, as if waiting for instructions. Eleanor's mind reeled at the implications. "Get in," Marcus said, glancing nervously at his rear-view mirror. "Colonel Webb's people are less than 5 minutes behind us, and if they catch us here, none of us will live to see tomorrow." Eleanor climbed into the passenger seat with Rex settling protectively in the back, her world spinning with questions she couldn't begin to articulate. Marcus drove with practiced efficiency through suburban streets, taking seemingly random turns that gradually led them away from town toward the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. "2 years ago," Marcus began, his eyes constantly checking mirrors, "your son discovered something that powerful people wanted buried forever. Colonel Harrison Webb was running a private military contracting operation in Afghanistan, using American soldiers as muscle for what amounted to war crimes. Michael's unit witnessed the execution of 47 Afghan civilians, families, children, all killed to cover up a weapons trafficking operation worth $2.8 billion. Eleanor felt sick. Michael would never have stayed silent about something like that. He didn't. He testified before a closed military tribunal, provided evidence, named names. Webb had connections all the way up to the Pentagon. Within a week of Michael's testimony, 3 other soldiers who'd been scheduled to testify were killed in what were reported as combat accidents. The car climbed a winding mountain road, leaving the suburbs behind for stands of aspen trees turning gold in the autumn light. Eleanor gripped the door handle as the implications of Marcus's words sank in. So they faked his death. It was the only way to keep him alive long enough for the investigation to proceed. The official story was that Michael Whitman died in an IED explosion, body too damaged for an open casket funeral. His real identity was buried in the witness protection program, and he was relocated to a safe house where he could continue providing testimony. Eleanor's voice broke. "They let me bury an empty coffin. They let me grieve for nothing. I know, I'm sorry, but Mrs. Whitman, you have to understand, Webb's organization has killed 17 people to keep this secret. Soldiers, investigators, even a congressman who started asking the wrong questions. The only reason you're still alive is because they needed you to appear normal, to act like the grieving mother they'd created." Rex whined softly from the back seat, and Eleanor reached back to touch his head. "What about Rex? Why didn't they just let me keep him?" Marcus's expression darkened. Because Rex wasn't just Michael's service dog. He was trained for a very specific mission, to carry information between Michael and his family if the normal communication channels were compromised. 2 years ago, Rex was supposed to bring you a message from Michael, along with evidence that would expose Webb's entire operation. They turned onto a dirt road that wound through dense forest, climbing steadily toward what looked like an abandoned ranch. Eleanor could see a weathered farmhouse in the distance, smoke rising from its chimney. "The night Rex disappeared," Marcus continued, "Webb's people tried to intercept him. Rex escaped, but he was injured and traumatized. It took me 6 months to find him, another year to gain his trust. I've been caring for him at a private facility, trying to complete his original mission, which was to bring you to Michael, but safely when the time was right, when we could protect you both." Marcus parked the car beside the farmhouse. "Mrs. Whitman, that time is now. Webb knows the investigation is closing in on him. He's making desperate moves, eliminating anyone who could testify against him. Yesterday, he put out contracts on both you and Michael." Eleanor's legs felt unsteady as she climbed out of the car. The mountain air was thin and cold, carrying the scent of pine trees and wood smoke. Rex immediately took point, scanning their surroundings with the alertness of a soldier on patrol. The farmhouse interior was spartanly furnished but clean, with military precision evident in every organized corner. Maps covered one wall, marked with locations and dates that meant nothing to Eleanor. A communications setup occupied one corner, radios, computers, equipment she didn't recognize. "This is a safe house," Marcus explained, locking multiple deadbolts behind them. "One of several we maintain for people in situations like yours. Mrs. Whitman, I need you to sit down for what I'm about to tell you." Eleanor sank into a worn leather chair beside the fireplace, Rex positioning himself at her feet. "There's more?" Marcus pulled out a tablet and showed her a photograph that made her gasp. It was Michael, but older than she remembered, his face bearing lines of stress and premature gray at his temples. He was standing beside a young woman with dark hair and a little girl who couldn't have been more than 8 years old. "Your son is married, Mrs. Whitman. His wife's name is Sarah, and your granddaughter is Emma. They've been living under assumed identities in Montana, but Webb's people found them 3 days ago." The word granddaughter hit Eleanor like a physical blow. "I have a granddaughter?" "Emma knows about you. Michael has told her stories about her grandmother who was a nurse in Vietnam, who taught him to be brave, who would love her more than anything in the world if she could meet her." Tears streamed down Eleanor's face as she stared at the photograph. The little girl had Michael's eyes, Walter's stubborn chin, and a smile that could have belonged to any Whitman woman across generations. "Where are they now?" "Safe for the moment. But Webb is closing in. He's hired mercenaries, people who don't care about military protocol or rules of engagement. We estimate 48 hours before he tracks them down." Marcus sat across from her, his expression grave. "Mrs. Whitman, Rex's collar contains encrypted files that could bring down Webb's entire organization. Your son risked everything to get that evidence to you, because he knows you're the one person who would never stop fighting for justice." Eleanor looked down at Rex, who gazed back at her with those intelligent amber eyes. "What do you need me to do?" "We need you to testify, in person, before a federal grand jury that's been investigating Webb for 3 years. Your testimony, combined with the evidence Rex has been carrying, could finally end this. And then your family comes home, all of them. Michael, Sarah, Emma. They get their lives back. You get your son back." Marcus leaned forward. "But Mrs. Whitman, I won't lie to you. Webb will try to kill all of us before we reach that courtroom. This isn't going to be easy." Eleanor was quiet for a long moment, stroking Rex's head as she processed everything she'd learned. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows of the old farmhouse. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the steel that had gotten her through Vietnam, through Walter's cancer, through 2 years of believing her son was dead. "Marcus, I'm 78 years old. I've buried my husband and thought I'd buried my son. I've spent the last 2 years with nothing to live for except memories and regret." She looked at the photograph of her granddaughter again. "If there's a chance to bring my family home, to make sure that little girl gets to grow up with her father, then I don't care how dangerous it is." Rex's tail thumped against the floor, as if he understood that his mission was finally, truly beginning. "Well, I'll be jiggered," Eleanor said, using one of Walter's favorite expressions. "I guess this old bird isn't ready for the cage yet, after all." The next 18 hours passed in a blur of preparation and mounting tension that reminded Eleanor of her days as a combat nurse in Vietnam, when every decision carried life or death consequences. Marcus had transformed the farmhouse into a command center, coordinating with federal agents, safe house operators, and what he called assets in the field, people whose names Eleanor never learned but whose voices carried the same grim determination she remembered from the war. Rex had become a different dog entirely, his military training fully activated as he patrolled the farmhouse perimeter with clockwork precision. Every 30 minutes, he'd complete a circuit of the property, checking doors and windows with the thoroughness of a sentry who understood that lives depended on his vigilance. Eleanor watched him work and marveled at the intelligence behind those amber eyes. This wasn't just a pet who'd been trained to fetch. This was a soldier completing a mission 2 years in the making. The grand jury convenes at 9 a.m. tomorrow in downtown Denver, Marcus explained, spreading maps across the kitchen table. It's a 40-minute drive under normal circumstances, but Webb's people will be watching every route. We've identified at least 3 teams of mercenaries positioned between here and the courthouse. Eleanor studied the red X's marked on the map, each one representing a potential ambush point. How do we get past them? We don't go around them. We go through them. Marcus tapped a route that seemed to lead directly into the most heavily watched area. Sometimes the most dangerous path is the safest, because it's the one they least expect. The plan was elegantly simple and terrifyingly complex. Eleanor would travel in a decoy convoy, while the real evidence, the encrypted files hidden in Rex's collar, would take a different route entirely. FBI agents had been positioned at strategic points throughout the city, ready to converge on the courthouse when Eleanor arrived to testify. "What about Michael?" Eleanor asked. "Will I see him before the testimony?" Marcus hesitated. "Mrs. Whitman, your son and his family are being moved to a secure location as we speak. For their safety and yours, you won't see them until after Webb is in custody." "I know that's hard to hear." Eleanor nodded, understanding the logic even as her heart ached with the nearness of reunion and the continued necessity of separation. "I've waited 2 years thinking he was dead. I can wait another day, knowing he's alive." As evening fell, Marcus received a call that changed everything. Eleanor watched his face darken as he listened to whoever was on the other end, his responses clipped and professional. When he hung up, his expression was grim. Webb's made his move. 30 minutes ago, armed men surrounded the federal courthouse in Denver. They're claiming to be conducting security sweeps, but they're actually Webb's people. He's trying to prevent the grand jury from convening. Can he do that? Not legally, but Webb's betting that federal judges won't want to risk a firefight in downtown Denver just to hear one old woman's testimony. Marcus began packing equipment with practiced efficiency. "Mrs. Whitman, we need to leave now. There's a backup plan, but it's going to be dangerous." Eleanor felt a familiar calm descend over her, the same steadiness that had carried her through field hospitals under fire. "What do you need me to do?" "There's a federal facility in Colorado Springs, about 90 minutes south. Judge Patricia Chen is driving there tonight to convene an emergency session of the grand jury. If we can get you there safely, you can give your testimony and enter the evidence." Rex appeared at Eleanor's side as if summoned, his tactical vest already secured and his eyes alert. Marcus handed Eleanor a bulletproof vest that felt impossibly heavy across her shoulders. "Mrs. Whitman, I need you to understand what we're up against. Colonel Webb isn't just trying to silence testimony. He's fighting for his life. His organization has killed dozens of people to protect a multi-billion-dollar operation. He won't hesitate to add 3 more names to that list." Eleanor adjusted the vest and checked that Michael's purple heart pin was still secure on her jacket. "Marcus, I spent 2 years in Vietnam patching up boys who were younger than my granddaughter is now. I've seen what evil men will do when they think no one's watching. If I don't speak for Michael, for all those soldiers who died because they tried to tell the truth, then who will?" They left the farmhouse under cover of darkness, Marcus driving a nondescript pickup truck with Rex alert in the passenger seat, and Eleanor crouched in the back, covered by a tarp that smelled of hay and motor oil. The first 30 minutes passed without incident as they wound through mountain roads that seemed designed for exactly this kind of covert travel. Then Rex began to growl. "Contact," Marcus said quietly, his eyes fixed on the rearview mirror. "Black SUV, about half a mile back, matching our speed exactly." Eleanor felt her pulse quicken but forced herself to remain calm. "How many?" "At least one vehicle that we can see. Probably more that we can't." Marcus increased their speed slightly, testing their pursuer's response. The SUV matched the acceleration perfectly. "Mrs. Whitman, we're going to have to do this the hard way." The next 20 minutes became a masterclass in tactical driving as Marcus used every bit of his military training to evade pursuit through the winding mountain roads. Rex remained perfectly calm throughout the chase, his military discipline holding steady even as their truck took corners at speeds that made Eleanor's arthritis scream in protest. "There," Marcus pointed toward a cluster of lights in the valley below. "Colorado Springs. If we can reach the federal building, we'll have protection." But Webb's people had anticipated their destination. As they descended into the city, Eleanor could see roadblocks being established at key intersections, vehicles positioned to look like routine traffic stops but clearly coordinated to create a net around their target. "They're herding us," Marcus observed grimly, "closing off escape routes, forcing us toward a kill zone. Then we don't go where they expect us to go." Eleanor's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to making split-second decisions under pressure. "Marcus, is there another way into that federal building?" "Service entrance on the north side, but it's heavily monitored. By federal agents or by Webb's people?" Marcus considered this. "Federal agents, Mrs. Whitman, what are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that sometimes the front door is exactly where they don't expect you to go." Eleanor pulled out her cell phone and dialed 911. "This is Eleanor Whitman. I'm a federal witness under threat, and I need immediate police escort to the federal courthouse. My location is..." She read off the nearest street sign. "I'll be the 78-year-old woman in the army jacket with the German Shepherd." Within minutes, the night sky filled with the sound of sirens. Police cruisers appeared from multiple directions, their lights cutting through the darkness like beacons of hope. Marcus pulled into the parking lot of a 24-hour diner where Eleanor climbed out of the truck with Rex at her side. "Ma'am, are you Eleanor Whitman?" The lead officer was a woman about Michael's age, her expression professional but concerned. "We have orders to provide immediate escort to the federal courthouse." Eleanor looked back at Marcus, who nodded grimly. "Well, this is where we part ways for now. Rex goes with you. He's carrying the evidence, and more importantly, he's trained to protect you no matter what happens. What about you? I'll lead Webb's people away from here, buy you time to reach Judge Chen." Marcus knelt beside Rex, speaking quietly to the dog in what sounded like commands Eleanor didn't recognize. Rex listened intently, then returned to Eleanor's side. "He knows what to do now. Trust him." The police escort moved through Colorado Springs like a presidential motorcade. 6 cruisers surrounding Eleanor's vehicle as they navigated city streets toward the imposing federal building downtown. Eleanor kept one hand on Rex's head, drawing strength from his calm presence as they approached the moment she'd been preparing for, without knowing it, her entire life. "Mrs. Whitman," the escorting officer said as they pulled up to the federal building, "are you ready for this?" Eleanor looked up at the building where her testimony would either bring down a corrupt system or die with her in the attempt. Rex pressed closer to her side, and she could feel the weight of the evidence hidden in his collar, evidence that represented not just her son's sacrifice, but the sacrifice of every soldier who died trying to expose the truth. "I'm ready," she said, and meant it completely. The federal courthouse at 3 in the morning felt like a fortress under siege, its marble corridors echoing with the footsteps of armed marshals and the low hum of emergency lighting. Eleanor walked through security checkpoints with Rex at her side, the weight of her 78 years seeming to double with each step toward the emergency grand jury session that would determine whether her son's sacrifice had meaning or whether she would join the growing list of people who died trying to expose Colonel Webb's corruption. Judge Patricia Chen was a stern woman in her 60s who had driven through the night from Denver, her black robes wrinkled from travel, but her eyes sharp with the kind of focus that came from understanding the gravity of what was about to unfold. The grand jury had been hastily assembled. 18 citizens pulled from their beds to hear testimony that could bring down a multi-billion-dollar conspiracy. Mrs. Whitman, Judge Chen said as Eleanor entered the secure hearing room, "Before we begin, I need you to understand that your life is in immediate danger. Colonel Webb's people have made threats against this proceeding, against you personally, and against federal personnel involved in this investigation. Are you prepared to continue?" Eleanor looked down at Rex, who sat perfectly at attention beside her chair, his amber eyes alert and focused. Hidden in his collar was evidence that had cost lives to obtain, video footage, financial records, witness statements that could finally bring justice for the 47 Afghan civilians whose deaths had been covered up to protect a trafficking operation. "Your Honor, 2 years ago I buried what I thought was my son. For 24 months I've been living with grief that was manufactured by the same people who murdered innocent families to protect their profits." Eleanor's voice grew stronger with each word. "If I don't speak for Michael, for all the soldiers who died trying to expose this, then who will? If I let fear silence me now, then Webb wins, and every person who died for the truth died for nothing." The testimony that followed was unlike anything the grand jury had ever heard. Eleanor spoke for 3 hours, recounting everything Marcus had told her about Webb's operation, about the systematic murder of witnesses, about the fake death certificates that had torn families apart to maintain operational security. When she described learning that her son was alive after 2 years of grieving, several jurors wiped away tears. But it was the evidence Rex carried that transformed the proceeding from emotional testimony into an airtight case for prosecution. The encrypted files contained video footage shot by Michael's unit showing Webb's mercenaries executing Afghan civilians, including children, to eliminate witnesses to weapons trafficking. Financial records detailed the flow of money from defense contracts through offshore accounts to private military companies that operated outside legal oversight. "The defendant, Colonel Harrison Webb," Eleanor continued, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was revealing, "didn't just commit war crimes. He created a system where American soldiers became unwitting accomplices to mass murder, then killed those same soldiers when they tried to report what they'd witnessed." At 4:30 in the morning, as Eleanor was finishing her testimony, Rex suddenly became agitated. His ears pricked forward, and he moved to position himself between Eleanor and the courtroom door, his body language shifting from calm alertness to tactical readiness. The marshals in the room immediately went on high alert. "What's he sensing?" Judge Chen asked. Before anyone could answer, the building's fire alarm began blaring. Emergency lighting bathed the courtroom in red, and through the courthouse windows, Eleanor could see figures moving in the darkness outside. Too many figures, positioned too strategically to be coincidental. "This is Deputy Marshal Rodriguez," came a voice over the building's intercom system. "We have armed intruders on multiple floors. All personnel initiate lockdown procedures immediately." Webb had made his final, desperate move. Rather than allow Eleanor's testimony to proceed, he was attempting to storm a federal courthouse, an act of domestic terrorism that would either silence the witnesses permanently or expose his organization's willingness to wage war against the American justice system itself. "Mrs. Whitman, we need to move you to a secure location," one of the marshals said. But Eleanor shook her head. "No, I finish this first." She turned to Judge Chen. "Your Honor, how much more do you need to issue indictments?" Mrs. Whitman, the grand jury has heard enough evidence to indict Colonel Webb and 17 members of his organization on charges ranging from conspiracy to commit murder to treason, but your safety, my safety doesn't matter if Webb escapes justice. Eleanor could hear gunfire in the distance now, growing closer. If something happens to me, if they succeed in stopping this proceeding, promise me that Rex gets to Michael. Promise me that my granddaughter gets to know what her father died trying to accomplish. Rex whined softly, as if understanding that Eleanor was preparing to make a sacrifice that would separate them permanently. He pressed closer to her side, offering comfort even as he remained alert for threats. The sounds of combat grew closer. Footsteps in the corridor outside, shouted orders, the unmistakable sound of breaching charges. Webb's mercenaries were fighting their way through federal security, willing to kill federal agents to reach Eleanor before she could complete her testimony. "The evidence Rex is carrying," Eleanor said urgently to Judge Chen, "includes locations of other witnesses, other families who've been told their soldiers are dead when they're actually in hiding. Your Honor, this isn't just about my son. There are dozens of families out there living with lies, grieving for sons and daughters who are alive but can't come home because of what they know." Judge Chen nodded grimly. "Mrs. Whitman, on behalf of the United States government, I accept your testimony and the evidence you've provided. The grand jury will vote on indictments as soon as we're secure." The courtroom door exploded inward. 4 armed men in tactical gear burst through the entrance, their weapons raised and their faces covered by masks. Rex immediately positioned himself in front of Eleanor, his training overriding any concern for his own safety as he faced down threats that outweighed him by hundreds of pounds. "Stand down!" the lead intruder shouted. "Eleanor Whitman, you're coming with us. Anyone who interferes will be shot." Eleanor rose slowly from her chair, her arthritic joints protesting, but her spirit unbroken. "I'm a 78-year-old woman who's already said everything she came here to say. If you want to shoot me for telling the truth, then you're just proving everything I testified about." The standoff lasted perhaps 10 seconds, an eternity during which Eleanor stared into the eyes of men who had been ordered to kill her, while Rex growled with the intensity of a soldier prepared to die defending his mission. Behind the intruders she could hear more gunfire, closer now, suggesting that federal reinforcements were fighting their way toward the courtroom. Then everything went wrong at once. More explosions, screaming. The lights went out completely, plunging the courtroom into darkness, broken only by the muzzle flashes of weapons being fired in corridors that Eleanor couldn't see. In the chaos that followed, Eleanor lost consciousness, her 78-year-old heart finally overwhelmed by the stress of a night that had demanded more from her than any person should be asked to give. The last thing she heard was Rex's anguished howl echoing through the federal courthouse, the sound of a soldier who had completed his mission but lost the person he'd been trained to protect. Eleanor's world returned in fragments, the sterile smell of disinfectant, the rhythmic beeping of machines, and a weight across her legs that felt impossibly familiar. Her eyes opened slowly, adjusting to the soft lighting of what was clearly a hospital room, and the first thing she saw was Rex's massive head resting on the blanket beside her, his amber eyes fixed on her face with an intensity that spoke of hours of vigilant waiting. "Well, I'll be jiggered," she whispered, her voice hoarse and weak. "You're still here, boy." Rex's tail thumped once against the hospital bed, but he didn't move from his position. Eleanor could see bandages around his front leg and a patch of shaved fur on his shoulder where medical tape had been applied. Whatever had happened in that courthouse, Rex had been injured protecting her. "Mrs. Whitman?" A familiar voice made her turn toward the door where Dr. Sarah Martinez stood with a mixture of relief and concern on her face. "Thank God you're awake. We weren't sure. Your heart stopped twice during the ambulance ride." Eleanor tried to sit up, but her body felt like it belonged to someone else. Weak, unsteady, disconnected from her will. How long have I been here? 4 days. You've been in and out of consciousness, but this is the first time you've been truly alert. Dr. Martinez moved to check the monitors beside Eleanor's bed. Mrs. Whitman, do you remember what happened at the courthouse? The memories came flooding back. The gunfire, the masked men, Rex positioning himself between her and danger, then darkness. The testimony. Did Judge Chen get the indictments? Dr. Martinez smiled. 18 federal indictments were issued 3 days ago. Colonel Harrison Webb and 17 members of his organization are in federal custody. Mrs. Whitman, your testimony brought down the entire conspiracy. Eleanor felt tears of relief streaming down her cheeks, but they were mixed with a deeper fear. What about Michael, his family? Are they safe? They're safe, more than safe. Dr. Martinez's smile widened. Mrs. Whitman, there's someone here who's been waiting to see you. Eleanor's heart began to race as Dr. Martinez stepped aside, and a man appeared in the doorway. Tall, broader than she remembered, with premature gray at his temples and lines around his eyes that spoke of stress and years of hiding. But those were Michael's eyes. Michael's stubborn chin, Michael's way of standing with one shoulder slightly raised that he'd inherited from his father. Hi, Ma, Michael said, his voice breaking on the simple words. Eleanor couldn't speak. For 2 years, she'd imagined this moment, dreamed of it, prayed for it during the darkest nights when grief threatened to consume her entirely, but reality was both more overwhelming and more perfect than any fantasy could have been. This was her son, older, marked by experiences she couldn't imagine, but alive and whole and standing in her hospital room like an answer to every prayer she'd whispered into the darkness. Michael? The word came out as barely a whisper. He crossed the room in 3 strides and knelt beside her bed, taking her hand in both of his. His hands were rougher than she remembered, scarred in places, but they were warm and real and unmistakably her son's. I'm sorry, Ma. I'm so sorry you had to go through this. I wanted to come home, wanted to call you, wanted to tell you I was alive, but they said it would put you in danger. They said Webb would kill you if he thought you knew where I was. Eleanor squeezed his hand as tightly as her weakened grip would allow. Don't you apologize to me, Michael Whitman. Don't you dare apologize for doing what was right, for standing up to evil, for protecting innocent people. She reached up with her free hand to touch his face, needing to confirm that he was real. I raised you to be a man who fights for justice, and that's exactly what you did. But the cost was worth it. Eleanor's voice grew stronger. Because you're alive, because those men are in prison, because other families won't have to go through what we went through. She looked down at Rex, who had been watching the reunion with what could only be described as satisfaction. And because this magnificent dog spent 2 years making sure we could find each other again. Michael followed her gaze to Rex and smiled, the first genuine smile Eleanor had seen from him since he'd entered the room. Rex saved my life more times than I can count in Afghanistan. Then he saved yours. Ma, there's something else you need to know. Eleanor's heart, already strained from the emotional reunion, began to race again. What? Sarah and Emma are here. My wife and daughter, they're in the waiting room. Emma's been asking about her grandmother every day since we arrived. Michael's voice was soft with emotion. Ma, would you like to meet your granddaughter? Eleanor couldn't answer through the tears, but her nod was unmistakable. Michael stepped back toward the door and gestured to someone in the hallway. A moment later, a woman with kind eyes and dark hair appeared, holding the hand of a little girl who looked exactly like the photograph Eleanor had seen at the farmhouse, except more beautiful, more alive, more real than any picture could capture. Emma, Michael said gently, This is your Grandma Eleanor." The 8-year-old approached the hospital bed with the careful curiosity of a child who had been told important things but didn't quite understand their full significance. She was beautiful in the way that children are beautiful, all possibility and innocence and bright intelligence. "Daddy said you were sick because you helped catch the bad men," Emma said seriously, "and that Rex helped you do it." Eleanor looked at this little girl, her granddaughter, Michael's daughter, a piece of her family she'd never known existed, and felt her heart expand in ways she hadn't thought possible at 78 years old. "That's right, sweetheart. Rex is a very brave dog." Emma brightened. "Daddy told me stories about you. He said you were a nurse in the war and that you saved lots of people and that you would love me very much if you ever got to meet me." Your daddy was absolutely right. Eleanor held out her hand and Emma took it without hesitation. "I love you more than you can possibly imagine, and I can't wait to hear all about everything you like to do. I like horses and reading chapter books, and I'm learning to play piano," Emma said with the enthusiasm of a child sharing her most important accomplishments. "Mommy says maybe you can teach me about being a nurse when you get better." Eleanor looked up at Sarah, who had been watching the interaction with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," Eleanor whispered. "Thank you for taking care of him, for giving me a granddaughter, for being part of this family." Sarah leaned down to kiss Eleanor's forehead. "Thank you for raising the kind of man who would risk everything to protect innocent people. Michael talks about you all the time, about your strength, your integrity, your refusal to give up even when things seem impossible." Rex shifted on the bed and Emma immediately turned her attention to him. "Can I pet him?" "Rex would like that very much," Eleanor said, watching as her granddaughter gently stroked the German shepherd's head. Rex's tail wagged slowly, and he closed his eyes in contentment. A soldier finally at rest after completing the most important mission of his life. "The doctors say you'll need several weeks to recover," Michael said, "but they're optimistic about your prognosis. Ma, I know you've been living alone, struggling financially." "That's all over now," Eleanor said firmly. "We're a family, and families take care of each other." "Actually," Sarah added with a smile, "we've been hoping you'd consider moving to Montana with us. We have a house with plenty of room, and Emma needs a grandmother to spoil her properly." Eleanor looked around the hospital room at her son, her daughter-in-law, her granddaughter, and the dog who had brought them all together against impossible odds. 4 days ago, she'd been a lonely widow preparing to enter a nursing home. Now she was surrounded by a family she'd thought she'd lost forever. "Lord willing and the creek don't rise," she said, using Walter's old expression. "I think that sounds like the perfect plan." 6 months later, Eleanor Whitman stood on the wraparound porch of a farmhouse in the Bitterroot Valley of Montana, watching her granddaughter Emma teach Rex to play fetch with a tennis ball that had seen better days. The spring air carried the scent of wildflowers and new grass, and the Rocky Mountains rose like sentinels in the distance, their snow-capped peaks catching the afternoon light in ways that reminded Eleanor daily of how beautiful the world could be when families were whole. "Grandma Ellie, watch this," Emma called out, throwing the ball with all the enthusiasm an 8-year-old could muster. Rex, who had spent years trained for combat and covert operations, now chased after a bright yellow tennis ball with the pure joy of a dog who had finally learned that play was possible. When he brought it back, his tail wagging with contentment, Emma rewarded him with scratches behind the ears that made his leg thump against the porch steps. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," Eleanor called back, settling deeper into the rocking chair that Michael had built for her birthday last month. Her recovery had been slower than anyone had hoped. Her heart attack had been severe, and at 78, healing took time that younger people took for granted. But she was healing, surrounded by love and purpose that made every day feel like a gift she'd thought she'd never receive. The farmhouse itself had been a revelation. Michael and Sarah had purchased it 2 years earlier when they'd first entered witness protection, but they'd never dared to make it truly feel like home. Now, With Colonel Webb and his associates serving life sentences in federal prison, they'd finally allowed themselves to put down roots. Eleanor's room was on the first floor with windows that faced the mountains and a bathroom modified for her mobility needs. Rex had claimed the spot beside her bed, though he still made nightly patrols of the property. Some habits from his military training would never fully fade. "Ma, dinner's almost ready," Michael called from the kitchen doorway. At 32, he was finally beginning to look less like a man constantly watching over his shoulder and more like the father and son he'd always been meant to be. The premature gray was still there and probably always would be, but his eyes had lost that wariness that comes from years of believing that any moment could be your last. The kitchen table could seat 8, though usually only 4 chairs were occupied. Eleanor, Michael, Sarah, and Emma, with Rex lying beneath the table where he could keep watch over all of them simultaneously. Tonight was different, though. Tonight they were expecting company. "Judge Chen called this afternoon," Sarah said as she carried a platter of her famous Montana beef roast to the table. "She wanted to make sure you were feeling up to the interview tomorrow." Eleanor nodded, straightening the purple heart pin she still wore every day on whatever shirt or sweater the weather demanded. Tomorrow, a crew from 60 Minutes would arrive to film a segment about the Webb conspiracy, the families that had been reunited, and the ongoing congressional investigation into military contractor oversight. Eleanor had become, somewhat reluctantly, the face of military family advocacy, testifying before Congress, speaking at veterans events, and working with organizations dedicated to preventing the kind of systematic deception that had torn her family apart. "I'm ready," she said, though the prospect of national television still made her nervous. If our story can help other families, if it can make sure no other mother has to bury an empty coffin while her son hides from his own government, then it's worth whatever discomfort it causes me. Emma looked up from cutting her meat with the careful concentration of a child still mastering dinner table skills. "Grandma Ellie, will you be famous after the TV show?" Eleanor laughed, the sound carrying none of the sadness that had colored her laughter for 2 years. "I hope not, sweetheart. I'm just an old woman who got lucky enough to get her family back." "You're not just anything," Michael said firmly. "Ma, what you did, standing up to Webb, risking your life to expose the truth, that took more courage than anything I did in Afghanistan." "Nonsense." Eleanor's voice carried the gentle authority of a mother correcting a child's misconceptions. "You spent 3 years living with the knowledge that speaking the truth could get you killed, and you spoke it anyway. You testified against men who had already murdered other soldiers to keep their secrets. I just told a grand jury what you'd already told them." Sarah reached across the table to squeeze Eleanor's hand. "You both did what was right, even when it was dangerous. Emma's going to grow up knowing that her family doesn't back down when good people need protecting." After dinner, as had become their tradition, the family gathered in the living room where Eleanor would read to Emma from whatever chapter book they were working through together. Tonight it was Charlotte's Web, and Eleanor couldn't help but smile at the parallels, a story about unlikely friendship, sacrifice, and the kind of love that transcends species boundaries. Rex settled beside Eleanor's chair, his head resting on her feet in a gesture that spoke of complete contentment. The dog, who had once carried encrypted evidence through enemy territory, now spent his days playing fetch with the little girl and his evenings listening to bedtime stories. Sometimes Eleanor caught him staring out the windows toward the mountains, and she wondered if he was remembering his years of service. But mostly he seemed as grateful as she was for the simple pleasure of safety and family. "Grandma Ellie," Emma said as Eleanor closed the book at the end of the chapter, "Daddy says Rex was a soldier like him. Does that mean Rex understands about being brave?" Eleanor looked down at the German shepherd, whose amber eyes seemed to hold years of wisdom about duty, sacrifice, and the weight of protecting people you love. I think Rex understands about being brave better than most people do, sweetheart. He knows that being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do what's right even when you are scared. Like when you went to the courthouse? Exactly like that. Michael appeared in the doorway, having finished cleaning up the kitchen. Come on, kiddo. Time for bed. Tomorrow's a big day. Emma hugged Eleanor goodnight with the fierce affection of a child who had never known a world where grandmothers weren't available for hugs whenever needed. As Michael carried her upstairs, her voice drifted back down. Daddy, do you think the TV people will want to pet Rex? After Emma was in bed, and Sarah had settled in the den with her evening tea and a book about sustainable farming, Eleanor and Michael sat together on the front porch, watching the last light fade behind the mountains. Rex lay between them, alert but relaxed, the perfect embodiment of a soldier at ease, but never off duty. I got a letter today, Michael said quietly. From the family of Sergeant Williams, one of the soldiers who died trying to expose Webb's operation. His mother wanted to thank you for making sure his death wasn't in vain. Eleanor was quiet for a long moment, processing the weight of gratitude from a mother whose son would never come home. How many families have reached out? 43 so far. Families of soldiers who died, families who've been reunited like ours, families still waiting for answers. Michael looked out at the valley where fireflies were beginning to blink among the wildflowers. Ma, you've become a symbol for them, a reminder that sometimes the truth wins even when powerful people try to bury it. I never wanted to be a symbol. I just wanted my son back. I know, but sometimes we don't get to choose the roles we play in other people's stories. Michael reached over to scratch Rex behind the ears. This guy didn't choose to become a messenger between separated families, but that's what he became. You didn't choose to become an advocate for military families, but that's what happened when you decided to tell the truth. Eleanor rocked slowly in her chair, listening to the evening sounds of a Montana spring, owls calling, wind in the pine trees, the distant sound of Emma practicing piano scales upstairs. 6 months ago, she'd been a lonely widow preparing for a nursing home. Now she was surrounded by a family she'd thought she'd lost forever, living in a place where mountains touched the sky and her granddaughter's laughter filled rooms that had been silent for too long. Some things are worth fighting for, she said finally, using the phrase that had become her personal motto during the darkest days of the investigation. Even when you're fighting ghosts. Rex's tail thumped against the porch floor in what Eleanor had learned to interpret as agreement. Sometimes the best victories came disguised as the hardest losses, and sometimes the greatest love required the greatest courage. Looking at her son, thinking about her granddaughter sleeping safely upstairs, Eleanor knew she would make the same choices again, face the same dangers again, risk everything again for the chance to bring her family home. After all, as Walter used to say, family isn't just about blood, it's about who you'd walk through fire for. Eleanor had walked through fire, and it had led her exactly where she belonged. Sometimes life asks us to endure losses that feel impossible to survive. Eleanor Whitman spent 2 years believing her son was dead, facing financial ruin, and preparing to enter a nursing home with nothing but memories to sustain her. At 78, she thought her story was ending, until a loyal German shepherd named Rex appeared in a parking lot and changed everything. What followed was a journey that proved it's never too late for miracles, that family bonds transcend time and circumstance, and that sometimes the greatest courage comes from the most unlikely heroes. Eleanor's willingness to fight for truth, despite overwhelming odds, didn't just bring her son home. It reunited 47 families torn apart by lies and corruption. Her story reminds us that our golden years aren't about winding down, but about discovering new purposes, unexpected joys, and the profound impact we can still make on the world. Whether you're caring for aging parents, reconnecting with estranged family members, or wondering if your best years are behind you, remember that love always finds a way home. The bonds that matter most, family, loyalty, truth, only grow stronger when tested by adversity. Share your thoughts. Have you ever experienced an unexpected reunion or second chance that changed your perspective on life? What family traditions or values do you hope to pass down to the next generation? Leave a comment below and tell us about a time when persistence and love helped you overcome what seemed impossible. Your story might inspire someone else who needs hope today.